Hello, and welcome to the Tree Planners Podcast. We are recording on a different date than usual. Um, Recording being the operative word here. We did we did have a conversation on Tuesday in a regular time slot. Hey, Deb.
Hi there. I'll be with you in 2 secs. Are we
Sure.
live?
Yep.
Oh, Lord.
I'm just explaining that we are live for real this time, whereas last time we were not. Well, we were live, but I had not hit the go live button to actually send our liveness out into the world.
Oh, well, that's a humbling experience, I would imagine.
Okay, you know, uh, yeah. So we the three of us we had a great conversation on Tuesday, a regular time slot, and the hour blew by, and at the end of it, I was on a high because it was just we you know I think we had a good time, and then I realized I had not hit the go live button, so we did not broadcast. I did not record. I had nothing to share after the fact, and
Gone with the wind.
yeah, poof,
I see live recording and the time slot. So,
good,
yeah.
good.
It was a good
So
practice run.
yes, exactly, right. Um, but anyways, yeah, onto business. We're joined again by Deb Crandall and Robert Brown of Storm, Save the Oak Ridges Moraine. And thanks so much for doing this again, guys. I
Hey, it was so much fun the first time.
Okay, yeah, good.
Really was, Adam. Thank you.
Adam, we're gonna have too much fun with this. Come on, you know that.
No, I know. I deserve it too. This time, though, I think so we're still getting acclimatized to this platform that we're using to do these live streams and recording. And one of the things that we had last time, so we're talking about the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is part of the Green Belt, but also distinct. And we were trying to describe kind of where it is for those who watching
Mhm.
or listening who might not be aware. And we were just, describing it because I hadn't set up a way of sharing a map or anything like that. I'm hoping that
Well,
I
good.
may do
I
that
was
this
hoping
time.
you would do that because I think that kind of provides the context for us, our conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully it works. Uh, therefore my qualification that we're still getting used to this platform. But to start, why don't and we sort of did this last time as well. We went back a couple of decades, really now, I guess, to when Storm started and looked at the history of the organization, what brought it about, kind of the political context and the environmental context, I guess, at that time. Do you want to take a swing at that again, Deb?
Sure. And it was not, good to have something to reflect on and to how I would kind of explain it differently. Because I think that there really are three phases of the Oak Ridges Marine campaign, and the first one um, was from 1990 until 2001. There were two components to that, and that was the first part of the campaign, which was getting the legislation and making the case, raising awareness, doing the science. The provincial government had set up a 3-year planning study from 1991 to 94, and that was 15 background studies. So really developed a very robust database about the Oak Ridges Marine demographics, water, natural heritage, cumulative effects monitoring, transportation, trails. It was quite an exhaustive process. And then the latter part of that first part of the campaign was actually securing the legislation. And that was so the first was done in a Liberal, then NDP, and then Mike Harris, second term of Mike Harris. And we were able to, the impact of the potential impact on the Moraine expanded beyond just the Moraine boundaries to affect primarily the downstream community of Toronto. And so the city of Toronto got involved. Save the Rouge, Earth Roots, the whole campaign just kind of expanded. And because the moraine, it's really where the waters all start. There's over 65 river and stream systems that flow north and south. The major rivers, the Humber, the Don, part of the Credit, the Nottawasaga, the Ganaraska, the Otonabee, the Lake Simcoe going north, Holland River, Pigeon Black. So it's a really important, ecologically important part. And so that was so the first campaign, the first part of the campaign was in fact securing the legislation, and then the second part from 2001 until about I would say 2015, taking in the first review, was about supporting and um, promoting and strengthening the implementation of the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. And so now we're in the third part, which is now we're having to defend it and we're having to really protect it from the forces that have been unleashed upon us by this very highly um, socially, economically conservative government. So that's kind of the three stages. So I was, the first part was a volunteer board, no staff. The second kind of decade started with paid staff, and now we are um, sitting with Robert Brown as the acting interim, soon to be paid executive director. So that
Okay. Can we do a Coles note on what exactly the legislation does?
sure. So and I think it's important to understand kind of the South Central Ontario and the Greenbelt. You got to kind of go back into its constituent parts. So the Niagara Escarpment Act and Plan were the first models. They came in, and the act came in the 70s. The plan followed 13 years later in 85, I think. And it was a land use plan. It had its own legislation. Then in 1990 is when the awareness of the fragility and the lack of protection of the Oak Ridges Moraine became apparent when we started to see development moving north out of Toronto. And at that point, there was nothing in the official plans. There was nothing. So our objective from the very beginning was to secure provincial legislation to protect the Oak Ridges Moraine. And our model was the Niagara Escarpment Act, Plan and Act. That was the model that we were bringing forward. We had a strong headwind in opposition because the commission was reviled. It took a lot. I mean, the Niagara Escarpment was a real case study in opposition, bringing in a new way of viewing the land. But it took a long time, and it was in many people's minds they did not want to emulate what had happened on the Niagara Escarpment with a
Hmm.
independent commission. So our goal, Storm's goal, and that we teamed up with the Federation of Ontario Naturalists, Save the Rouge, this whole consortium of organizations. Our goal was to have specific legislation for the Oak Ridges Moraine. And so in 2001, we talked about the political windows of opportunity, the winds of change that came about. City of Toronto got involved. There was a big Ontario Municipal Board hearing, and it forced the government, Mike Harris's government at that time, to take action because it was just obvious that the planning system had been broken. It was not sufficient to protect what needed to be protected on the moraine. And so there was Chris Hodgson pulled together an advisory uh, ta- round table, stakeholders. Storm was part of it, and we ended up with Oak Ridges Marine specific legislation,
Hmm.
and it's enabling legislation that allowed a conservation plan to be developed, and it was based on the very latest ideas of conservation biology, so that there's a massive natural heritage system comprised of natural core, natural linkage. There was a buffering around that natural heritage system under countryside, and then 8% of the marine was settlement area. So, in essence, 92% of the moraine was off limits to any new major development.
Okay.
It recognized existing as of right. It recognized that there were already uses on the moraine, but that new development was going to be directed to the settlement areas or off the Oak Ridges Moraine.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so that's the plan.
The I want to get to like something we I think teased out a little bit last time was the emphasis on protecting water, and then the consequences of the red tape
Mm.
reduction efforts of of that progressive conservative government, Mike Harris government in Walkerton. But first, maybe I'll just see if I can share these slides.
Oh, good.
And did that work?
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
All right. So this is, I mean, it's a little cropped up top there, but I wanted to, this was something I was kind of working on for another project, but it just kind of gives a clear bird's eye view of the green belt. One of the things I wish I was trying to figure out before this is if I could show my cursor on here as well to the viewer, but I don't think that's happening.
No, it's
But the
No,
different colors make it.
yeah. Okay, so like the light green is the green belt area. That there's kind of three shades. So the lightest shade is the green belt area. Actually, the whole area, all of it is the green belt area, right?
mhm.
Um,
Um,
I, can I take a stab at it?
yeah, go for it.
Sure. So if you see the long squiggly thing, which heads up into Georgian Bay, that's the Niagara Escarpment plan area.
Hmm.
The escarpment is much bigger than that, and something to remember as we were going forward here is that the current boundaries of the Niagara Escarpment plan area are 63% smaller than what had originally been proposed, and it was through
Oh, right.
13 years of intense lobbying. I mean, and just such naked self-interest with.
One thing, Deb, just as you're explaining this, it's also occurring to me that this is for some people out there, they might be only listening to this in the podcast form.
Oh, mhm.
So be a little bit
Descriptive.
extra, yes.
Okay. So what we have is we've got a map of South Central Ontario, and we've got Georgian Bay up at the top. We've got Lake Ontario, and it's really the kind of the middle of it. The eye of this is the city of Toronto, where it's and which is all, of course, very urban. So we have the Niagara Escarpment plan area, which is squiggling up north, and then it goes down into the around Hamilton and down into Niagara country, and that came into effect in '85, and it was in 2001 that the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is, think of it as like an eyebrow that is over the city of Toronto, and it connects from the Niagara Escarpment way over into Northumberland County beyond Rice Lake. And as I said, that area has over 65 river and stream systems that bubble up and run north and south off the Oak Ridges Moraine to Lake Ontario and into, sorry about that.
Well, Deb, as you're explaining that, I'm just going to flip to the next slide. Or no, sorry, I'll stick on this slide, but the next slide illustrates some of those the water systems that come off the moraine.
Oh, good. Yeah. And so, and then in 2005, the McGuinty Liberal government, what they did is they added an overlay, and it really knit together the Niagara Escarpment plan area, the Oak Ridges Moraine plan area, and then had another layer of protected countryside. And in within that is a natural heritage system, agricultural system, etc. The beauty of this is taking these two major landforms, the Niagara Escarpment and the Oak Ridges Moraine, which are kind of a visual basis. The Niagara Escarpment is all about the vistas and the views and the natural cliff areas. Oak Ridges Moraine is all about its water system, and it overlaid a protected countryside with an agricultural, a human layer to it, a social layer to it. So that whole thing, which is about 2 million acres, describes a very dynamic working landscape between people living there, making a living. There's settlement areas, there's roads, and there's also this incredibly important ecological, hydrogeological jewels. So, oh, that's great.
So here's
Wow.
this. I just for listening, I just flipped to the next slide here, uh, and it shows a sort of digital elevation model with a color ramp, so that the higher elevations are brown, the lower elevations are sort of darker green. You can see the eyebrow, as Deb described it, of the Oak Ridges Moraine, kind of the higher elevations going across the top of the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area there, and then you see these sort of fibrous, if that's or what roots or
Dendritic.
hmm?
Dendritic.
Dendritic
What?
river systems coming off of with their
That's it.
with the small kind of tendrils in the uplands of the moraine, collecting into larger rivers as they get closer to the large water bodies of Lake Simcoe in the center, and then Lake Ontario on the bottom to the south, and Georgian Bay, Lake Huron up to the north. And then on the left, or I'm not sure how that works for viewers. Left, I think, right on one side, there's the dark brown of the Niagara Escarpment, which are all higher elevations as well.
Did you, is this a, did you make this from different data layers or is this something that you imported?
I made this from a number of different
Oh,
data layers. We sell a version of this on our site. I've been sort of working to refine it a little bit,
because I'm
but
not, I've never seen the rivers so clearly marked with the elevation.
It's a
mhm.
gorgeous map. It's stunning.
It tells a story, doesn't it? Right there. Boom.
Yeah, it's really about the value of the moraine, in particular the Oak Ridges moraine in this map, but moraines generally in the ecosystem services that they provide in terms of water.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
was I was just up on the Oro Moraine with Kim Kasari. Um,
Hmm.
we were driving. She's got a lot of concerns about Horseshoe Valley Resort and Craighurst and um, and expansionary. There's an expansionary growth paradigm up there, and the Oro Moraine is just a gem. It's just this, it's a really important moraine, and I'm hoping that we as Storm can work to highlight the significance of the Oro Moraine. In fact, we did a project on the moraines of the greater Golden Horseshoe, which I don't know if you've got it, Adam, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
It was done through Greenbelt Foundation funding, and it's pretty cool because this is a glaciated landscape. And don't let me go don't let me go on about glaciers and how important they are. So I'll stop. I'll send you that report and you can take a look at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we live in a landscape shaped by those glaciers. Just to open that door for you a crack, Deb.
Yeah, bugger. So because if you, it's just we don't recognize how lucky we are to live in this. It's a landscape that was renewed. Like the soils we have been renewed in geologic terms, but it's just like a brand new landscape. So if you go south, if you're driving south, and you're in Ohio. So midway around middle of Ohio is where the glaciers, the terminal moraines were, and then the climate changed and it started pulling back. But if you start going into Kentucky and Tennessee and South Carolina, you realize what a different landscape because it's from my eyes, it all looked really tired.
Hmm.
The soil it's like it's all oxidized, but it's tired. And here, this is just like God. We have such assets here with this landscape in all of southern Ontario. Anyway, and then moraines, right? Which is, man, they do all the work for us. They provide all of this water at no charge. It's just
Hmm.
these rivers. So um, I just went to see, and I'm a little bit of a tangent, but Robert McFarlane talking about "Is a River Alive" is the name of his book, and he just says we are so lucky here. We've got so many rivers in Ontario, and this is unusual. There are not that many rivers around the world. Like it's a so we've got to learn to really appreciate it, and I think that's part of the work that Storm is continuing to do is to bring us back to the Oak Ridges Moraine. People have heard of the Greenbelt, and that's fantastic. Now the job is to say, okay, within that is like it's like a really significant jewel of a landscape.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I wanted to back up a little bit and just touch on some of that, some of the developments that happened right when the Oak Ridges Moraine legislation came about, or just before. So I had mentioned this red tape reduction. I forget what was it actually called, the red tape commission or something like that.
it was called "Who Does What" or something, and surprisingly enough, it was David Crombie who headed that.
Oh wow, that is surprising.
Yeah, and I remember seeing him, and he was. It- we were all surprised at him, but he's a go-to guy. People go to him
Yeah, to get things done. Yeah,
to solve things, and I think he did whatever he could. It could have probably been a whole lot worse, if
yeah,
David had been part of that. I'm pretty sure I've
yeah.
got it that David headed up that commission.
The yeah. So this a lot of it's quite widely recognized, I think, that the reduction in red tape in regulations around environmental protections led to the Walkerton E. coli outbreak, which happened Walkerton's a small town in southwestern Ontario, kind of kind of west of where I am in Simcoe County.
So just south of, I think, Owen Sound area, Grey
Yeah,
County, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there was a lot, a lot of rain that happened, and as a result, then a lot of water movement. But one of the things that happened then was E. coli from a farm ended up contaminating drinking water for residents of Walkerton, and so more than 2,000 people were sickened. 7 people died as a result of this, and quite a few others, were left with chronic illness as a result of this. And so I think, and this was a really big deal. I remember this. It was, I don't know, 2000. Yeah, so this was a really big deal in Ontario, for good reason, as you can understand. And just, it's interesting to me that then the salience of water and how important it is to have good water really rose in prominence after that. And then, perhaps the follow through in terms of understanding the value of the Oak Ridges Moraine, and the ecosystem services that it provides to our largest population center, the Toronto and the Greater Toronto area.
I mean, one could almost say that it paved the way for the attention given to the Oak Ridges Moraine by this government, because I think it we were in an Ernie Eves government at the time that the Oak Ridges Moraine uh, plan came into effect. I'm pretty sure about that. All right.
There's one of the we'll move forward more to the contemporary day soon. There's just, and I often go back to this. It's a thought experiment that oh, what's his name? The Black Swan. Totally gapping on his name. Author, academic. He has this thought experiment basically where he goes over a fictional counter history of, or counterfactual of, a airline pilot in the year 2000 who realized that cockpit cabin doors had to be strengthened, that it was important for the security of the airlines, and or maybe it wasn't the pilot, maybe it was like a legislator or something like that. Anyways, he fought, he pulled all of his favors in, spent all of his political capital in getting better security for airline pilots and at a significant cost to airlines, to regulators, all this sort of stuff. And none of them were happy with having to pay this extra amount of money. And so a few years later, 2002, 2003, they are kind of fed up with these extra costs that they have to spend on airline security. And the legislation is repealed, and this guy basically is booted from office and lives out the rest of his days in ignominy. He didn't accomplish much, but in that the factual to that counterfactual is 2001 9/11, right?
All right.
So that didn't happen. And for me, this is always, I love this thought experiment because when it comes to regulations and red tape, they're part of their value is the friction that they throw, the grit that they throw in the cogs, in the wheels, right? And so, just in terms of that sort of reacting to disasters, reacting to bad things that happen, and our policy largely being as a result of that is so, in the context that we were just talking, it took Walkerton, or at least, not entirely perhaps, but that was a significant factor. And I think we often see this dynamic, but, especially when it comes to regulatory policy and things that are enacted in the public health or in the public good, that it takes something bad to happen first for it to happen, for these changes to be brought about because they carry a cost and expense and because they need to be justified to some extent. And we saw that again with the PPE with COVID, right? A lot of that just prior had been sort of thrown out because it was just deemed too costly and wasteful to maintain. And so in terms of, I know maybe this is a bit too much of a tangent to go on here, but just in terms of policy making and recognizing the value that nature and nature-based solutions and a lot of public health measures and a lot of these things, sure, they're costly, but they do prevent a lot of bad things from happening. The unfortunate fact is that when something is prevented from happening, we never know about it. Yeah,
I mean, and I'll just the segue is here we are now. Here
right.
we are, almost as if all of those lessons had never been gone through. None of
Hmm.
it was, and now now this government has um, totally strangled the conservation authorities, which are the ones that are in the trenches dealing with flood hazards at a time when I mean, and it's just even to even have to say it is ridiculous at a time with such uncertainty in the climate of where we live and the floods. I mean, so it's a mind-boggling mindset, and I profess to have no idea how these people think.
Hmm.
So
It's it's I think equally troubling what we've seen in a couple of the last campaigns that we've done. Of like, I don't know what we call them now. Maybe like scarecrow instruments or scarecrow ministries or scarecrow authorities. Is that not only are, as Deb says, they're not functioning, is that the kind of political apparatus around them is pretending as if they do function. So they're going to the public and telling it that such and such a development has been vetted by such and such an authority, when we know that that authority no longer has the ability to review the claims that they have made. So they're using them as these kind of uh, false data points. It's a giant like screen or tableau that is up in front of all these kind of projects, claiming a level of safety and environmental protections that are long non-existent. So it's equally problem in that it's like this. I don't know, to a system of government that is thoroughly based on marketing and advertising rather than driven by policy and I don't know, like
data,
data.
science, evidence.
I hate to make the like that claim of like reality because that is what we're what I find we're fighting is two different versions of how reality is presented. Like we've got mayors running around thinking that their strong mayor powers are legitimate. Like I don't know what bizarro world you live in when you think that those powers are anywhere legitimate, but yet they are legal. So yeah, that's a side tangent maybe, but yeah,
Yeah.
the scarecrow environmental protections and like the arguments going on around that have been really troubling, but they've also been difficult to get around when um, folks aren't paying very, really, really close attention to what's happening, and when it takes a really nuanced kind of argument to show what's happening. So that's been difficult.
Well, yeah, I mean, so last time we were also talking about how Storm was kind of ready to step into the breach when the conditions were right to advance this project. And, one of the things that we were talking about was how, so where our governments and regulators and legislation kind of fall down, how there's a need for grassroots organizations to step up and fill those gaps. But how that's a constant struggle for grassroots organizations too. I mean, the funding is always limited, and where there is funding, typically it's tied to very particular outcomes. You got to meet your objectives that you sort of set out in your grant proposal and these sorts of things. So actually having that built-in resilience that's so important to address these issues is and always it's always a pretty tenuous proposition.
Hmm. So, I mean, um, a number of times along the various campaigns were these windows of opportunity, and some of them are policy windows, some of them are uh, opportunities for an amplification of our voices. So that when Storm was just created, was came together, and we're talking about some university students from Trent and Waterloo, and some retired teachers who just in different parts of the Moraine met each other and had been starting to talk about this thing called the Oak Ridges Moraine, and just at that time, David Crombie, the same dear David Crombie, and Ron Cantor, and a government that was embracing science-based evidence. It was a time when our ministries, people like John Riley, Steve Varga, these ministry staff were writing and creating policy. They weren't writing policy; they were doing the kind of analysis and writing that gave wings to a policy platform, and really smart people, and a ministry that had foresters and stewardship people on the ground doing ground truthing. That is just not existent today. That is not existent. The times trying to get hold of any ministry. So in Caledon, I'm also with Democracy Caledon. In Caledon, we've got a mayor that is quite literally out of control, and so trying to get some support from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs to say, how can we, what tools do we have here? And like nobody answers the phone. Or if they do, it goes to a personal phone and they don't even answer as, hey, my name is so and so, I work with M&R. It's just like this, as it's a shadow box of what is there now. So that, I mean, that's, I don't know how you get around that. I don't know how you do that. But so the windows of opportunity are really important, and they could be. We David Crombie was had this royal commission, and so he set up these opportunities to have to come in and make submissions and talk to them to hearings. And then John Sewell was undertaking the whole revisiting the whole Planning Act, which provided opportunities for hearings and meetings and workshops. And so we jumped right into that. It was like, okay, we're just going to amplify that. And then again in 2001, when a political scandal provided suddenly hit the airwaves, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing was accused of bribery of the head of UDI. Somehow it escaped from the Premier's office when a complaint was made by the Steve Kaiser, and it got into the whole um, um, the regulatory part of things, the law enforcement, and suddenly we've got a scandal. And it was like, could you give us any like manna from heaven? Because we were able to just jump right into that, and the Toronto-based journalists were put on high alert. Like before, we were having to spend. We went down a number of times to the Queens Park media just to talk about the Moraine, and they're like, "So what's a Moraine?" And they were kept on calling it a marina, and and so the scandals just provided this like, whew, and so boom, we jumped right into it, and that is what and we worked that really well, and it was a really broad-based coalition of groups, and we worked it, and suddenly, and then there was a by-election up in Vaughan, again. Um, Greg Sorbero was coming back into politics, and that was just a perfect timing. He won the election, and that's when the advisory panel was called. So windows of opportunity are, I mean, they really, if you can identify them and you can be ready for them, they provide you with that opportunity to really make a difference. Yeah.
I went to high school with Greg's couple of Greg's kids. Our
Oh, Zach,
friends spent.
is it Zach?
No,
Zachary?
no. Noelle was and still
Okay.
is a friend.
He's the singer, right?
No, Martina's the singer.
Oh, okay.
Martina was a friend as well. Yeah,
Oh,
she's a
cool.
couple years younger.
I always liked Greg Sorbera.
Yeah,
He was quite charming, and he was funny, and he actually um, when he got up to, it was during the election in 91, I think, and he looked over and he announced the first expression of provincial interest in the Oak Ridges Moraine, and he looked over to Dorothy Azard and said, "See, I didn't forget." And so there's always been a really good working relationship with Greg, and yeah,
he's still. Yeah, I think he's still pretty active, right? In pushing for
probably.
some pretty positive things.
Yep.
And together, I think he's with David Crombie. They're it's it's good to see good people doing good things.
But here we are, and I think we got to start talking about what's our reality right now, and you know, it,
Well, to that point, one of the things that I find interesting is the use of conservative in relation to this government.
mm,
I mean, there isn't a heck of a lot that they're actually conserving, right? Like so first of all, you need a value orientation if you're going to identify what is important to conserve, to maintain. I'm not sure they even have that other than money, right? Like it's actually a pretty profoundly radical. This is way off topic, by the way. Sorry, we were we're on
this is
here
what
to
it's
talk about
about,
that.
Adam.
Hmm.
We are in the middle of this, so I'd say
Yeah.
it's totally on topic, personally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they just brought in legislation, Bill 5, that kind of effectively negates pretty much any regulation in select areas, and those areas their criteria for selection is almost entirely arbitrary, right? It's almost entirely up to members of cabinet.
And we're hoping that regulations will come out where, I mean, I don't know the legislation well enough, but surely a regulation is going to come out that applies some criteria that we can actually be privy to, because is the 413 suddenly becoming a special economic zone? Um,
Hmm.
Bradford
Yeah.
bypass.
Yeah.
What else? How do you define what is important when, as you say, this government has no ideology, has no ethical or defined sense of what they value. They don't seem to have articulated that.
Hmm.
Or so.
It really kind of seems like this bill is going to be something that supports both, or as it's turning out to be, is going to support those objectives that the provincial government are pushing. But this is also the sweetheart deal with the Liberals now, that it's going to push the developments that they're looking to forward in these kind of, like, I guess, what's leaking around these ongoing trade negotiations with the United States. And
Mm,
that's, I guess, the larger piece of the pie on this one.
Like the national interest stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, for rare earth minerals and that kind of thing. So,
And the role they have in this trade, in this global
I
trade.
mean, I mean, that's that.
playground.
Yeah, like that's a value orientation there, and that sounds like there's some sort of nascent criteria emerging, but the legislation is even broader ranging. You know, if you're just focusing on the Ring of Fire, uh, that's one thing for critical minerals and stuff like that. But if you're just kind of carte blanche, this is wherever we deem it, you know, necessary or whatever. That's even bigger.
Well, we put in we responded to that ERO that went out, and we kind of applied it to how this is going to affect the Oak Ridges Moraine, and there are a series of deep effects that will happen to the moraine with this policy. But also, what we're seeing when we're talking to councils is that I think I don't know that the public really understands how radically transformative this policy agenda has been. You know, like usually we see policy that's enacted in a slow, kind of measured way, and this has been anything but. Like, have you seen a policy agenda like this in your history, Debbie?
No, no, and it's the proverbial whack-a-mole, or I like to describe it as a hydra, because we had the Greenbelt scandal, the land swap. They were shut down. The public, their MPs were like, "Holy God, what's happening?" So they shut that down, and then they just bloop, came up suddenly. Now we got minister zoning orders, and then oh, that paints a bad picture to us. So we'll give the strong mayor powers. So it is just this rolling, unfolding, and one can only think that there's. I'm not. I am not a proponent of the Star Chamber conspiracy, but one thinks that there's probably a very tight group of very smart developer lawyers and planners who are strongly advising this government on what are the threads that you have to pull here to fundamentally dismantle what has been of um, years of formulation of and just thinking back to the growth plan and the green belt, this an amazing, I mean, it was recognized worldwide for the work that it did, for the growth plan providing that the boundary, like it provided the opportunity for smart growth development to stop to that would allow the green belt and the agricultural lands and the ecological lands to be protected. So you didn't have to you could satisfy the population explosion, the housing within the growth plan. And I mean, talk about the first thing is you break that down. So ah, never seen anything like this ever. We
So
thought
part
Mike
of
Harris was bad. We were concerned about Mike Harris with a bit of his amalgamation. He is puppy chow compared to what we're seeing now.
But
yeah.
it goes right down. Like, I remember a time when planners got into planning because they wanted to protect things, you know, and that isn't even the case anymore. Like, it's that I don't know what the motivation is behind it now, but the motivation for there's no motivation, it seems, for good planning, and the motivations behind it are definitely not to protect these kind of like rare natural resources that are sustaining the economies and our livelihoods in the GTA, and that's
It
terrifying.
would it would be interesting to go and to understand what some of these planning schools are actually focusing on, because I have friends who Dan McCarthy and Graham Whitelaw who are trying putting together a, hopefully they go with it, a shirk grant to really look at fundamentally changing the way that planning is taught, because I think it's I don't think, yeah, anyway, I'm looking into that, but I would say
Oh,
it's rooted in that.
it's a good point. Like when a few delegations have been making to councils. Like, I don't want to out ourselves too far here, Adam, but we both did masters at York and York's Faculty of Environmental Studies, which was with a planning program, right? And that was a longer planning program that was supposed to have like teach planners like a smart development model that was very inclusive and sensitive to environmental issues. And what I'm seeing when I go to make these delegations is planners that graduated that program. Like, I'm going out there and I'm having that like that Star Wars moment. It's like, Anakin, you were the chosen one. Like, what are you doing now that you're, pushing all these things and working for these interests at these time, and like throwing away all these environmental concerns that you were supposedly taught to protect. So I think it's a good question, Deb, as to like maybe not what the schools are teaching, but I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that That my impression of their pedagogy was that, you know, it was a pretty robust in terms of valuing the environment. But it seems like, and to your point, Deb, with the ending of the growth plan, basically, like that that gave them that gave some shape and form to what to the space that they could work within right now. And so now, so even if you're like, typically when you become a planner, often you'd go either to work for a municipality or for a developer.
Mhm.
And now, and in both of those scenarios, you would have this kind of sandbox that you could play in, right? Or that you could operate in, or whatever. But that sandbox has now just been sort of exploded to everywhere, and that the guidance, I guess, if you will, of good planning principles no longer really applies to the roles, to the only roles really that are available to people with those degrees. So it's got to be kind of crappy, I think, for somebody who goes into school for planning with that hope to do stuff, because it's you think about like what you're doing there is you're shaping the world in a very different way, and for decades and possibly centuries to come. Well, you know, centuries with change thrown in there, but you're really profoundly having an impact in the world. And so doing that in a way that provides optimal outcomes is kind of like the core question that you're trying to get at.
I mean,
Yeah.
so when the latest, so when places to grow became place to grow, and then it was just poof disappeared into a planning, the the provincial planning. That's not statement now. Yeah, statement, provincial planning statement, rather than a PPS. Anyway,
Yeah.
what happened with the town of Caledon, what I just found out about Oro Medonte, is that the official plan, so in response to this change in focus to away from good planning principles, the official plans for those municipalities who chose to go down that path fundamentally removed the systemic natural heritage system thrust. So Caledon no longer has an ecosystem approach to planning embedded into its official plan. It is landscape based, it is features based, it is not systemic. Talking to up in the Oro Moraine with Kim, their official plan, because of the previous council, similarly, the Oro Moraine has been extirpated from that OP. It's mentioned once, and this whole concept, the basis of a systems approach to natural heritage protection through conservation biology, has been fundamentally removed. And so, what you were saying about your worldview, and so now we have young planners coming in, and they are no longer part of a progressive environmental ecological systems approach to, and it's kind of being reduced down to features and silos, and that's a fundamental change, and that's going to take years to get back again. It's and yeah, it's quite something, and we're seeing it happening in Caledon, where it's just it's a whole different municipality than it used to be. We have a mayor who is using her strong mayor powers to to appoint chairs and vice chairs of a golf tournament. I
Interesting.
didn't I didn't know that golfing was a national prior or a provincial priority of this government. I thought it was building houses, but apparently it's about golfing now.
Well, that really gets at, I think, part of this dynamic that this government, I mean, it seems to be pretty prevalent around the world, this trend towards consolidating power upwards,
Mm,
and how
mm,
then that reshapes those like avenues towards that power rather than being distributed. as you would want them to be in a democracy,
Mhm.
kind of bottom up. They're really top down, but that also means that you gotta any to be successful in that power structure, you have to do things that appeal to and agree with those able to make a determination on your behalf, right? And so those sort of higher up in the power hierarchy there. And so, yeah, like having golf tournaments, like that's probably not, doesn't have a lot to do with golf. It probably has a lot to do with the golfers
Next
who are
election.
doing that, right?
And it's the next election, right? You're just
Yeah.
consolidating. So the point, I guess, just as we were talking, I think the role of Storm and Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition, I think it may have to shake itself off and come up with a different strategy because we
It's definite that, like, if I interject, Deb, it's definite that
please,
Storm, based in like land use planning advocacy, came out of an environment where there was a sharing of power that went into these decisions.
Hmm.
That is certainly not the case anymore. There's a facade that power is shared, like we're going to go through these motions of public deliberation and all this kind of stuff. But that's just there to waste our time. Like, I'm going to spend a day writing a delegation that's 20 pages long, and that committee's then going to throw it out and not even read it, right? They're just there to waste our time, run us down, and beat us up. And I think if we still are working under that function that power is
precisely.
shared, we're fooling ourselves.
Yeah.
Power is not shared anymore. The decision making is not shared. And that is perhaps one of the most fundamental structural things that we need to be attacking.
And that is a really, really key thing. I keep on coming back to this now. We're going into, the world that we are living in and that we are sort of passing off to our children is an increasingly uncertain one because of the shit we're doing.
Yeah.
you know and unfortunately, like a lot of that stuff that we've like that's causing the uncertainty is a result of the type of decision makings that you've just described, right? So decisions that have been made that have not reflected the multitude of inputs and outputs, the systemic nature that of life, of the world that we live in, where everything is
Complexity.
interconnected.
The
Sorry?
complex the complexity.
Complexity, right? So and it's got a very, very simplified notion of what should be, which uh, well, no, I wouldn't. I won't say that's necessarily a conservative thing because you can see that on both sides of the political spectrum. Kind of the farther you get towards the extremities, it seems like the more simplified black and white things get. But nevertheless, that imposition of one sort of frame, of one sort of desired outcome in through that policy making framework is, I think, what has led to the increasing uncertainty that we have. That it's so like really refusal of working with nature and recognizing the fact that we are part of nature. And so, where am I going with this? Oh, the increasing. I mean, so there's a weird thing that's happening is as we're sort of living in a world with increasing uncertainty, people long for that certainty more, and I think are turning more towards this authoritarian
Precisely.
tendency, right? But it's
Precisely.
really we're just backing ourselves more and more and more into a corner.
So what is going to be our new response to this? Is it going to be what's going to be happening on Saturday, which is a distributed set of protesting? This is
Okay,
something that
so
I think
that's
Canadians, I think we
right.
got to get our proverbial shite together a little bit and get a little bit more. And I've been saying this before, but direct action. It's nice. It's what Robert's saying is like it's great that you. It's a facade that they're listening to us. They're not. This is not the avenue with which they're listening to us. These policy responses and these shams of putting up for the consultation. They're just, I have delegated so much at Callan Council more than I have in the last year than I have for the last 10 years, and it's like here we go again, guys. And I say, I wish I weren't here. I wish I didn't have to be here. But you guys are making me be here. And so, and yet we know that they're not listening to us.
Yeah.
So,
Like, on one hand, we have to do it because we need to be legally obliged to have a voice on that
yeah,
opinion. So if anything happens, we can be there and refute it. But at the same time, as Deb's saying, like, it's
it's it's time for a different. playbook. And
Yeah.
I'm both Robert and I missed that wonderful conversation you had about Bill 5. I think it was a Simcoe County Greenbelt.
Mhm.
Would love to hear. I have not yet tapped into what came out of that, whether or not some very cool ideas about how does one counter this, how do we organize ourselves to 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 put us back into nature.
Well, our last conversation, Robert brought up the deep networking notion, which I love. I mean, we're tight on time, but do you want to give a? Because I think that's like for me, I think that's really core to finding useful ways forward in so many different contexts. Do you want to give like a real?
Yeah, perhaps I was just saying, like when the last time the 10-year review came around, Storm Coalition brought on folks like myself to do a lot of canvassing and outreach into the communities. And what they were doing then was a kind of new technique that was called like deep canvassing. And while we did have an agenda, we were there to inform people about what was happening on the Moraine, what the threats were, and that kind of thing. The approach and introduction was really different because we knew at the time that we are going into like a deeply conservative neighborhoods with people that have very maybe very different views than ourselves, right? And we were there more in a listening and conversational tone, trying to make emotional connections with these folks, trying to like have like I guess reignite like properly political discussions where we can have constructive disagreements and where we are respectful and we're coming to understand both sides of these truths. And I think Deb was talking about like these the ability to hold multiple truths at one point in time as being so important when we're in such like a fractious political environment. And I think that's definitely a model that we need to revisit, but also I think we need to go back and revisit a lot of the older models that perhaps we, have been rejected in lieu of, all these new fandangled kind of like technological modes of canvassing and donor attracting and like all this kind
What
of
they
stuff.
do, Robert, is they separate us from ourselves and from each other. So, like a bus tour, as I was mentioning the last time, the impact that a bus tour has to bring people to the landscape and to take them up to the headwaters of the Don or the Humber and just say, okay, you see that little bloop bloop bloop, that little,
Mhm.
that's where the water begins, right there, and it has magic. It people are deeply affected by that, and they keep talking about that. But like 20 years ago, remember that
Yeah.
bus tour? So I think it's finding each other again from behind our screens. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Yeah.
Find community. It's like building that community. So, um, I'm not doing a plug for Mount Wolf Farm, but the only thing I will say is it is a CSA operation that our family has operated for 10 years now. But I won't go into any more promotional thing than that. Is the added benefit, the best thing that ever has come out of this is the community that we are creating and the people that we are having chance to talk to. And it's really important. It's fundamental to what we are as people, as humans. So I think
Well, you guys have already been exposed to these questions, but I'm going to ask them again. We
We'll
have,
see if they changed.
yeah.
I think they're
Well,
good. I didn't like my answer last time.
okay. Well, so we always ask three questions at the end. And so the first is, what advice would you give a young person who wants to make a difference? And you guys can take it in turn or whatever you like.
You're younger than I am. Start, please, Robert.
Deb's pointing at me. I don't know. I think I'm going to go with the one I kept with before. Like, teaching at York, I think the kids we were teaching knew exactly what was going on. They had very clear sight about what was going on. And while we could provide them with tools and different instruments to get them perhaps where they wanted to go, I think they knew what was happening. I think, maintaining that knowledge without getting it sucked out of you and beaten down, I think that's probably the thing.
I think that just what we were talking about is get out from behind your phone. And I don't want to sound like a cranky old Luddite, but recognize the nature of what is being to be human and to connect with people. And yeah, don't get out onto the land, get out there and just be part of it. And then that, because there's critical thinking. Like these kids are, they've been exposed to so much of this, the uncertainty, that they're ready. So just top it off with being connected with people and the land.
Question number two: how do you think about failure, and how do you respond when it happens?
So having had many failures, failure is probably the single most important thing um, to learn to have a critical reflection, to start to understand the role of power dynamics and power politics in all of the work that you do. If you're always succeeding, you never have a chance to, you don't need to kind of go back and say, huh, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? When you fail, those that are serious about the work that they're doing will sit back and go, okay, we had a mission here. We didn't get the outcome we wanted. Why is that? And then you start to, when you're able to talk to a lot of people about that, you will quickly realize that I've got to change my approach. But there's also that other element where this is all about power. This is all about the power imbalances and the sharing. And that's when you really get very deep campaign successes. So it's from failure that you can only get success, if you ask me.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I think Deb's got the answer to that one. And I would only add to it is just like maintaining that capacity to start again. Like I
Yeah.
think that's the key part is to revisit it again, to repeat it again, to restore it again. I don't know.
Hmm.
Don't be beaten down by it. Recognize failure for the wonderful thing that it is, right?
Yeah,
The,
because this is the number one cause of burnout among folks in what we do. Like those that can, I think, that can bounce back after taking a hard hit, and as Deb said, reflect critically and move forward in a constructive way. It's the only way that you'll ever be successful doing this work.
yeah.
And finally, what's your greatest fear for Ontario and your greatest hope?
Um, I My greatest fear is that the tipping point for ecological integrity and ecological resilience gets reached. And yes, there's a lot of land in Canada, but this is a very rich and important part of the country and or of the province. So my concern is the cumulative impacts of what we're doing if we're not able to protect those natural heritage systems that allow other species to coexist with us. We don't know what that tipping point is. We don't know what that point is of no return. And the way that we're heading, we're not even exploring, we're not even asking the question anymore. We're just, it's just like hell bent. So that's, yeah, that's my concern. And the only way we're going to protect water is if we have another Walkerton. So
Hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
terrifying thought, isn't it? You're just like waiting for the disaster to happen, so maybe the ship rights itself.
yeah, but that's, yeah, boy, you think we'd learn, but we apparently we haven't. So I don't want to leave on too gloomy a note, but that's my concern.
Concern, and but the second part was hope.
Oh, young kids. I mean, so I'm also part of the Greater Takaranto Bioregional Movement, which is coming out of the Legacy Project out of Uxbridge, tapping into Joe Brewer and his regenerating the earth approach. And these kids, so we were just at an eco fest that is put on by the kids of Markham. They are just like, you just come out of there just going, oh my goodness, we're in good hands with these guys. And so our job is to give them a world that they can actually, like, we have, that doesn't has not reached that tipping point. Our job is to give them a canvas that they can still play on, because they're ready to, from the kids I see, they are ready to march and to live more in harmony and with the values, like a very strong value system. So Yeah, we just got to let them do their. We got to let them have the dream that they need to move forward and to make the world a better place. And they're so delightfully naive and idealistic, and how can you not be completely inspired by that? So
How about you, Robert?
I think the fear, I would agree with Debbie again, but also I think maybe in the shorter term is my fear that, and maybe referencing what you were saying, Adam, is that we aren't able, like we've got a lot of folks that are alienated from politics right now. And I don't think they're lazy or apathetic. I think they've been disenfranchised from it. They don't have a stance. They're, uh, disillusioned with the options that are on the table. And I think we need to be able to find that thing to bring these folks back into the fold. And if we're unable to do that, or if they continue by getting captured by their fear and uncertainty, and as you say, brought into a kind of more kind of authoritarian system that promises that for them, I think we're in grave trouble. um and I think we're seeing that, like we've got a government that's using a lot of uh, they're using like a right populist planning regime that is structuring more kind of catastrophe into the system, right? To make it more, to destabilize it further down the road. And that's problematic.
Hmm.
I guess in the near term, what I'm hopeful about is this summer. Like through this conversation, we've been talking about windows and opportunities, and what we've seen with the Moraine, at least, is that when the government and the development lobby overplay their hand, when they get caught up in scandals, is that there's a window that opens. And I'm hopeful that this summer, when I'm talking to people, I'm saying like, "Hey, how's your summer going? What are you going to be doing?" And they're like, "Hey, I'm going to be the best Indigenous ally I can possibly be this summer." And that's an amazing answer, and I think that's something we can all get behind. And yeah, so I'm really hopeful for what's going to happen this summer. We're starting to see these kind of trickles of various scandals that are opening up, and we still haven't got the RCMP report. So I'm hopeful that we are about to see another window. Yeah.
excellent.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that I managed to hit that go live button this time. And just my usual kind of closing statement. If you are listening or viewing this podcast, if you could leave us a rating on whatever platform you've got, I guess. Apparently, that really helps with other people being able to find the show. So that would be super valuable. We're here every Tuesday, typically Tuesday at 11. Those times change a little bit depending on the guest's availability, but for the most part, you can find us here on Tuesdays. And I think last time we also agreed to do another segment more closely focused on what's happening in Caledon and some of the municipalities that are kind of casting, I don't know, what lustful eyes on the green belt.
Yeah, the one thing that is working is calling out bad actors, because we've got a lot of retail politicians in place, and calling them out and calling a spade has been one of the things that has been super effective. So it would
All
be
right.
good to have a conversation around that. I'm sure Debbie's got.
I mean,
Yeah.
understanding the Wild West that we've become, it's quite lawless
Yeah.
in Caledon, very
Okay.
lawless.
All right. So that's it for now, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Adam.